Hello. This is the first video in a series that I'm going to be making, providing an introduction to species counterpoint in Western music. In this first video, I'm going to cover three terms that sometimes get confused with one another: polyphony, counterpoint, and species counterpoint. Polyphony is a musical texture involving multiple simultaneous melodies. Most music doesn't have a polyphonic texture. When we sing the national anthem, for instance, even if there are thousands of people singing together, they're still only singing one melody, not multiple melodies. That's called monophony. And in most popular music, there's only ever one melody to listen to, which is sung by the lead singer. And the other instruments just provide that one melody with a rhythmic and harmonic background. That kind of texture is called homophony. Genuine polyphony happens when there are at least two equal melodies that to some degree compete for the listener's attention. This might seem like a rare texture, but it is extremely important in understanding the traditions of Western music. Counterpoint, on the other hand, is the system developed in Western music that coordinates the voices in a polyphonic texture. Think of polyphony as the what. It is the fact that there are multiple melodies. Counterpoint is the how. How do we perceive those melodies as listeners, and how do composers write their music so that the melodies cooperate with one another instead of sounding chaotic and muddled? The most important thing to know about counterpoint is what its purpose is. The ideal in Western polyphony is to achieve independence of voices. That means composing multiple melodies so that they appear to elegantly glide past one another, like ballroom dancers, rather than step on one another's toes. Just as bad would be if one melody clearly depended on another, since then we would have homophony instead of polyphony. Keep in mind also that polyphony occurs in lots of other cultures around the globe, but when people use the word counterpoint, they usually mean the sets of practices developed in Europe over the last 1,000 years or so. Here is a short example of some excellent Renaissance polyphony. You don't need to be an expert of counterpoint to tell that this was written by a master. Just notice how easy it is to focus your attention on either one melody or the other, or to shift your attention between them, or to listen to the overall effect of the two melodies together. Species counterpoint is a specific pedagogical tradition aimed at explaining how counterpoint works by isolating its basic elements and treating them one at a time, from simple to complex. It's a way of teaching counterpoint. The most famous example of species counterpoint is the GRADUS ad PARNASSUM, or Steps to Parnassus, by Johann Joseph Fuchs, written in the 1720s. That is the textbook that I'm going to focus on in this video series. Since it's still very accessible, you can get a used copy on Amazon for less than $10, and because this specific book was used by many of the greatest composers in Western music. Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven were all taught out of this book, and they used it to teach their students. As I said earlier, species counterpoint is a teaching tool. In the same way that visual artists have to practice drawing cross ratios and anatomical studies and still lives with spherical fruit, and they have to practice those isolated, simplified subjects over and over, so for the same reasons composers wrote practice compositions that isolated the simplest polyphonic situations in order to master them. Species, by the way, just means type, so in species counterpoint, we practice the abstract types of relationships two melodies could have with one another. Many people will say that in species counterpoint, the goal is to imitate the style of Palestrina, or the style of Renaissance vocal polyphony. If that were true, our exercises would be improved by including things like cadences and ornaments and rests for breathing. But all of those things are irrelevant to what we are really trying to do, which is to achieve an ideal of voice-leading independence that may or may not have existed in any particular musical style, past, present, or future. In his textbook, Fuchs provides a cantus firmus, meaning fixed song, or I will sometimes refer to it as the given melody, and asks the student to compose another melody in some prescribed relationship to the cantus firmus. We call this newly composed melody the counterpoint. In this video series, we will only look at two-voice counterpoint, although Fuchs also includes sections on counterpoint in 3 voices and 4 voices. In this example, the cantus firmus is in the lower voice, but it could also be above. This Dorian cantus firmus, by the way, is a very famous one, and we'll discuss what makes it such a good starting point for composition in the next video. Here is what Fuchs's given melody sounds like. There are 5 species, or types, of counterpoint in the species counterpoint method. In the first species, the counterpoint and cantus firmus move at the same rate, forming a 1-to-1 rhythmic proportion. For this reason, first species is also sometimes called note against note counterpoint. Notice that this example is written entirely in whole notes, but it could have been written all in half notes or all in quarter notes. The duration doesn't matter. What's important is the proportion between the voices, that one note of the given melody is counterpointed against one note in the new melody. We also don't care what instruments are playing or whether it's loud or soft. This is a thought experiment. It's the most pared down possible polyphony. In second species, the counterpoint and cantus firmus form a 2-to-1 rhythmic proportion. Notice that the counterpoint is now written in half notes against the whole notes of the cantus firmus. This new rhythmic situation gives the composer slightly greater freedom, but it also introduces new problems to be solved. In third species, the counterpoint and cantus firmus form a 4-to-1 or sometimes a 3-to-1 rhythmic proportion. I'll discuss why that is in a video dedicated to third species. In fourth species, the counterpoint and cantus firmus are metrically offset from one another. The tied half notes in the counterpoint are technically the same duration as the whole notes of the cantus firmus, but because they are offset, they overlap in an interesting way. Fuchs refers to these overlaps as ligatures, although in modern music theory, they're more usually called suspensions. In fifth species, the counterpoint is composed in a mixture of the previous species in relation to the Cantus Firmus. This is the last species, also sometimes called florid counterpoint, because it produces the most elaborate textures. Fifth species comes the closest to sounding like actual music. In fact, looking at it written on the page, it even visually resembles the Lassus example that I played earlier. And that is part of the point. If we can produce a composition exercise that resembles the best polyphonic writing, based only on the simple rules given by Fuchs, then we can be reasonably confident that those rules have captured something about the inner workings of counterpoint. I hope that you now have a decent idea of what species counterpoint is, if you did not already. The videos going forward will dive deeper into the specific rules of counterpoint for each species. In part 2, we will look at melodic fluency.